It's been a while since I've done an episode on a cinematic piece, and lately I've been feeling like it's time to do another one. Today, our focus is going to be on the craft and the craft legacy. A bit of content trigger warning here. We're going to dive into some topics today that some of you may struggle with. Those topics will touch on things like mental health, suicide and other internal struggles, sexual harassment, as well as what some would term woke topics. I'll do my best to keep this episode from getting too heavy or too long, but at the same time, I'm not going to shy away from something just because it's heavy. Obviously, we'll talk witchy shit too. You may have wondered a time or two over the course of these episodes, April, you're a nerdy witch. Why are you talking about these harder topics? Why cover movies and folktales? Why talk about mental illness? Why talk about things that happened millennia ago? Why not stick to what's trendy in our modern view of what witchcraft is? One side of that answer is that I'm not a doctor or a therapist of any kind. I'm always going to tell you to confer with one or the other when it comes to things that fall within those realms. But I will still bring you information and help make connections. I have two reasons for that. One, superficial tip of the iceberg stuff only gets us so far. And two, it's important to be able to dig into topics and talk about them, even if they're uncomfortable. The other side of that is, I feel it's important to know the history and everything else behind everything that we talk about. Knowledge is power. Hey, I'm April, and we are on a witchful journey. Someone recently told me, "You call yourself a witch, so you clearly don't know what you're talking about." Yes, I do call myself a witch, in the same way that someone refers to themselves as pagan. If you caught the last episode or are also nerdy like me, then you already know where I'm going with that. I mean, come on. I call myself a nerdy witch. If that isn't taking derogatory terms and flipping the script on them, then I'm going to need someone to give me a better example. Anyway, it's not the first time that something like that has happened. I'll go into that in a later episode, but let's stop and think about one of the many reasons why a comment like that would come up. One reason has to do with how witches are portrayed in cinema. Movies like The Craft and The Craft Legacy are a couple of examples. So, The Craft came out in 1996. The producer, Douglas Wick, wanted a movie that blended the high school experience with the practice of witchcraft. When the concept was handed over to screenwriter Peter Filardi, he did tons of research and wrote out a few different drafts, which included a darker ending where 3 of the 4 girls die while fleeing from their classmates. That ending didn't make the cut. And I'm sure if it had, the movie overall would have a completely different feel to it. When he handed over the draft to director Andrew Fleming, he said, "The movie isn't even really about witchcraft. It's about the power of adolescent pain." For a realistic feel for the witchcraft in the movie itself, they actually brought on High Priestess of Gardnerian Wicca, Pat Devitt, to consult. She made sure that the tools, rituals, and chants were based on real practices. We'll talk about some of those in a bit. According to critics, the movie should have been a flop. Even today, the ratings are mediocre. IMDb gives it a 6.5 out of 10. Rotten Tomatoes gives it a 57%. And Letterboxd gives it a 3.6 out of 5. When the movie first came out, critics said it was less than impressive, citing the underdeveloped characters and the lack of enough backstory. But there were droves of teens and young women who flocked to see this movie when it hit the big screens. A lot of that had to do with the posters for the movie. Not many movies at the time had posters that were of an actual scene from the movie itself. On the other hand, it was one of the first movies with teen girls as the main focus. Pretty much every other teen movie prior to The Craft was centered around teen boys. So, of course, teens and young women were going to flock to see this movie. The Craft ended up becoming a cult classic with a devoted fan base, and it still is today. No surprise there. The film resonated with a lot of youth, not just because it was a story about a group of outcasts, but it hit the nail on the head when it came to the struggles that teens experience in high school. It also showed the nature of power and how easily it can be abused. And, to top it off, it was released at a time when interest in witchcraft was reigniting, especially in the younger generations. I was a child when this movie came out, but once I was deemed old enough to watch it, it instantly became one of my favorites. Despite the attempts of the filmmakers, many real-life witches were disappointed with the portrayal of young witches in this movie. Many pointed out the inaccuracies and shook fingers at some of the scenes, saying that sensationalism seemed to be more important than truth. If you've never seen the movie, here's a quick summary. Sarah has moved to town with her father and stepmother. She gets enrolled at the local Catholic school and begins attending before she acquires her uniform, which paints a huge new girl target on her back. Sarah catches the eye of a small group of outcast girls, Bonnie, Rochelle, and Nancy, who begin to consider inviting her to be their fourth after Bonnie witnesses Sarah balancing her pencil on its tip during class. She's caught the eye of a jock as well, who warns her to stay away from the girls. Because they're witches, he says. Sarah finds herself interested in the jock, but is also drawn to these girls, who try to warn her that Chris, the jock, is actually quite the jerk. The girls befriend Sarah, and the quartet visit an occult shop, and Sarah begins to realize that there's some truth to what Chris said. An incident takes place after the girls leave the shop, which encourages Nancy to tell Sarah about Manon, and their goal as a coven to invoke the deity. Sarah's a little weirded out, leaves to hang out with Chris, and soon finds out that Chris is absolutely a total jerk. Sarah's comforted by her 3 new friends, and they decide to take a trip to the countryside for a ritual. They each input their desire during the ritual. One wants love, one wants beauty, one wants strength, and one wants to harness all the power of Manon. They soon discover that their spells are beginning to work, and they continue using magic for the things that they want. They end up getting overconfident. During another trip to the occult shop, they find a book called Invoking the Spirit, and disregard the shop owner's warnings by going to the beach and doing just that. Their spells and powers begin to magnify, and they begin getting exactly what they had asked for. Which, after their initial high of having things go the way that they want, they begin to realize that it's not all unicorns and rainbows after all. Sarah ends up on the dangerous end of Chris's obsession, which prompts Nancy to go to bat for her, and ultimately causes Sarah to have a falling out with the girls. Nancy's gone overboard with her hunger for power, and after one last battle, Sarah's able to bind Nancy's power and protect herself. Now, let's go over some of the examples of inaccuracies and sensationalism. Let's start with Manon. In the movie, Manon is the all-powerful deity. There's mention of him being even more powerful than the Christian god or any other biblical characters. Manon embodies nature, representing the primal. He also represents the wildness of humankind. Manon is a deity that was created specifically for the making of this movie. The goal was to avoid offending any real-world pagan religions, and probably also to avoid actually summoning or invoking a deity during filming. Now, the invoking of Manon is based on text from the Book of Ceremonial Magic by Andrew Edward Waite. I currently have a copy of this book on order, and I'm looking forward to thumbing through the actual pages. Moving on, Sarah's powers. Sarah seems to have the ability of telekinesis, which is the ability to move physical objects with your mind. In the movie, Bonnie sees Sarah balancing her pencil on her desk without touching it, and the pencil begins to rotate until Sarah's concentration is broken by Bonnie's gasp. In real life, there is no scientific evidence that anyone actually has the ability to do this. I'm not making any claims one way or the other, but it is on the list of things that are either inaccurate or fall within the sensationalism complaints. Another power that Sarah shows us in the movie is when the girls are talking about glamour spells. Sarah first changes the color of her eyes, then changes the color of her hair. And then later on, Nancy uses the same spell to make Chris think she's Sarah. Glamour spells don't work like that, so I understand the complaint of sensationalism on that one. Actually, side note, one of the comments that I get from time to time is something along the lines of, "You must have watched too much, insert witchy movie here, when you were a kid." The movies referenced were often The Craft, Practical Magic, Harry Potter, and sometimes the TV series Charmed. The insinuation was that because I watched them, enjoyed them, and practiced in real life, I was unable to distinguish between real life and fantasy. Bitch, please. But that's actually one of the downsides to making movies about things like witchcraft. People assume that because you enjoy those types of movies and practice the craft and or call yourself a witch, it means that you've bought into that fantasy hook, line, and sinker. Let me tell you, if you're not a witch or don't practice any form of the craft but are listening in today, we can distinguish between the two. Thank you very much. Such movies and TV series are for entertainment purposes, not homework. We can sit down and enjoy a movie or a show that just happens to be about witches or witchcraft. Anyway, the way that power gets bestowed upon the girls, Nancy especially, in the movie is out of touch with the way that it works in practicing the actual craft. CGI is not real life. Coven size. You don't need 4 to complete a coven. 4 does make it nice and neat when calling the quarters, but it's not mandatory. A coven generally consists of at least 3 people, and there isn't really a maximum number. It really all depends on how many people the high priestess, or high priest in some cases, is able to handle. The movie also leans heavily on Wiccan beliefs and practices, which is not the path that everyone takes. Witch and Wiccan aren't the same. You can be Wiccan without being a witch, and you can be a witch without being Wiccan. For example, the threefold law, or the rule of 3, is distinctly Wiccan. It states that whatever you put out into the world comes back to you times 3. It's a way to keep people from going hog wild with more baneful magic, out of the fear that that same energy would come back on them times 3. We'll go more in depth on that at some other time, but there are many witches who do not follow the rule of 3 for various reasons, myself included. I don't want to completely tear either of these movies apart because, like I said, I do enjoy the craft, especially around this time of year when there's lots of witchy movies being featured. I've only seen The Craft Legacy once, though, but I will say that it was good in a cheesy teen movie kind of way. We'll move on to The Craft Legacy in a moment, but I want to touch on some other things when it comes to the original. Now, one of the subplots is racism. And unfortunately, that's something that is encountered in real life. So we have Rochelle dealing with Laura's racism, which no one around her seems to feel a need to call her out on. That can really make you feel like an outsider. We don't know what else Rochelle has to deal with in terms of her home life because we only see a glimpse of what might be her home once, and we know nothing about her parents. But being in high school and being bullied, especially when no one around you seems bothered by it, that can feel huge. Because everything in high school generally feels like life or death, or at least make it or break it, right? And it's kind of that way for all the girls. Bonnie has extensive scarring all over her back and up onto parts of her neck. We don't know how she got them, but it seems that everyone knows about them despite her always covering up in the first part of the movie. Even most grown adults would be self-conscious about that. As a high school girl, being self-conscious about that would absolutely limit how much of life gets experienced. Wondering if anybody is whispering about your scars, who might make jokes or rude comments, etc. We also don't know much about her home life. We know that Bonnie's mother is active in her life and supports Bonnie undergoing a procedure to get rid of the scars so that she'll feel more confident. But outside of that, we know very little. We have Sarah, whose mother died giving birth to her. That in itself brings a lot of emotional baggage that probably includes some self-blame. It's also mentioned in the movie that she tried to kill herself at one point, which might be why they moved. But on top of that, she's the new girl in a Catholic school setting. Now, teenagers can be some real mean little fuckers in general, but being in Sarah's situation where you've moved towns and schools and are walking into an environment where you know absolutely no one, that feels incredibly isolating. You don't really know who to approach, you don't know who you can trust, you're getting side-eyed all the time because you're fresh meat. Rumors start to circulate because someone wants to try to work their way up the social ladder. Of course she ends up getting close with Rochelle, Nancy, and Bonnie. And then we have Nancy, who kind of surprises me a little bit, in a way. Generally, if you attend Catholic school, it means that your parents have a bit of money and can pay the tuition for you to attend. We know that Nancy's mother is a bit of a drunk. Her stepfather, or her mom's live-in boyfriend or whatever he is also a bit of a drunk. And he's an abusive creep to boot. But they live in what appears to be a rundown single-wide trailer. Which, no judgment on anyone that lives in one. But it does make me wonder how Nancy ended up in a Catholic school in the first place. Unless she got herself kicked out of the local public schools and the Catholic school is a last resort, who knows? But Nancy's got plenty of teenage angst to go around, exacerbated by her living situation, not just with having to deal with a creep of a guy living under the same roof, but also the leaking roof in her bedroom, the parental guardian figures fighting about money and bills, and the stigma, especially in a Catholic school, of living in a trailer. But we see her desperation to get out of that situation, the care that she actually does have for her small group of friends, as well as some mental health struggles that get magnified after she gets a taste of Menon's power. The craft did a great job calling on all the feels of anyone going through those experiences or something similar. It says, I see you. It acknowledges the bullying in school. It acknowledges the feelings of being ostracized by peers simply because you're different. It acknowledges how heavy and raw and painful things can get. It calls out to the younger audience because they can relate to it most. I'll use myself as an example. Not because I'm looking for anyone to say, oh my God, you went through so much, or anything like that, but because I've faced my shit head on and am perfectly comfortable talking about it, especially if it means that someone else feels seen for the first time. So, real talk for a minute here. So, I dealt with a bit of racism mostly in my teen years because my dad's white and my mom's Filipina. I dealt with jokes about my mom being a mail order bride. She's totally not. One lukewarm snot thought it would be cute to tell me to go back to my own country. I was asked multiple times if I was actually a citizen of this country, and weirdly enough, countless Pocahontas references. Though I was fortunate enough to have a friend who was also part Filipina, so it was cool to have something like that in common with someone else. I dealt with a lot of sexual harassment, some bordering on assault. It reached a peak where at one point I was actually held down in one of the classrooms in between classes and had to fight off 2 boys. I say that was the peak, at least in high school, because I reported the incident to the school in a written report. And then I found out a couple weeks later that other kids found out about the report and a bunch of other girls that they had targeted felt empowered to speak up as well. The boys were kicked off of their sports teams, suspended for a couple of weeks, I think, but I don't recall seeing them after that, so it could have been for the remainder of the year. And one of them transferred schools. But it didn't just come from peers. It also came from older adult men. So while I didn't have Nancy's same experience or even a similar one, I could relate to her in a way because I had been targeted by grown-ass men as well as peers. I can recall a handful of times when I had to take a detour when walking home from school to shake someone who was following me. There were things going on in my life at the time, as a teenager, that often had me in the grasp of active suicidal ideation, and I almost acted on it once. Another couple more minutes in that darkness, and I wouldn't be sitting here talking to you today. So the original movie definitely resonated with me on multiple points. As for The Craft Legacy, I'm still on the fence about how I actually feel about that movie outside of it being good in a cheesy teen movie kind of way. I did kind of expect more substance to this one, if I'm being completely honest. It came out in 2020, so that may have had a part to play in it, what with COVID-19, shutdowns, and all of the chaos at that time. It received mixed reviews from critics, just like the original, but unlike the original, it was not a sleeper hit. So, quick summary on The Craft Legacy before we move on. Lily and her mother Helen are new to town, and to make things even more uncomfortable, they're moving in with Helen's new boyfriend, Adam, and his 3 teenage sons, Jacob, Isaiah, and Abe. Do I even need to mention the super biblical names? Anyway, on her first day at her new school, Lily gets her period unexpectedly. Every teen girl's nightmare. And immediately starts getting harassed by a boy named Timmy. A group of 3 girls, Frankie, Tabby, and Lourdes, check on Lily and help her out by giving her a clean pair of pants. Timmy steps way out of line, and Lily kind of telekinetically throws Timmy, which is witnessed by a number of kids in the hallway at the time, including the 3 girls. During detention, Lily hears a voice that tells her to pretend to head to the bathroom. She does so, and the three girls meet her in the hallway and reveal that they telepathically communicated with her, that they're witches, a coven, and are looking for their fourth member. Lily chooses to join the coven, and the girls begin experimenting with their newfound powers. We begin to see some unsettling behaviors in Adam, which get more and more unsettling as the movie goes on. The girls put a spell on Timmy to make him less of a jerk, and he ends up making peace with the girls, joins them, and Lily starts practicing magic on her own, putting a love spell on Timmy. The girls find out that Timmy is found dead of a suspected suicide, and Lily admits to the coven that she put a love spell on him. The coven has a falling out with Lily, and they bind their powers. This ends up being terrible timing for Lily because she witnesses a strange gathering with a concerning level of toxic male speech from Adam, asks Helen if they can move out, and while searching for proof against Adam, Lily finds her adoption papers. Helen admits that Lily's biological mother is one of her psychotherapy patients. Adam reaches peak sketchiness, and there's a final battle between Adam and the coven. And then we find out that the psychotherapy patient is, in fact, Nancy. The more I think about it, the more I'm not particularly in love with this movie, and that's because they tried a little too hard to speak to a particular audience and left way too much hanging. Adam appears to be the leader of some kind of sexist male group. Later we discover that he has some kind of powers, but it's unclear if they've come from Manon or if he's possessed. He mentions a small pagan belief at one point, but this movie seems to try to paint paganism as dark and evil by loosely tying it in with the toxic masculinity that Adam spews. There's honestly a lot that gets shoved into this movie. It touches a little on what it's like for Timmy to have to hide that he's bisexual. One of the coven members mentions being transgender. Again, there's all that talk from Adam about how women are lesser and that men are their kings. It touches on the idea that being in a coven means that you aren't allowed to practice magic on your own. Then there's the whole shape-shifting stuff. There's some stuff that I want to address here. So, 1. There are absolutely sexist male groups out there. Whether they're informal friend groups or actual groups formed because they share that thing in common, I'm certainly not a fan of toxic masculinity. It's not a healthy mindset. I'm definitely not a fan of the insinuation that paganism is tied in with that kind of mindset because, as we've already begun to see in previous episodes, and I will continue to show you, paganism is about the balance of both energies. Neither is better or lesser than the other. On the other hand, the movie could just be mirroring the original by showing us that power, in the wrong hands, can be dangerous. I'm not entirely sure why Timmy's bisexuality or Lord's being trans is even brought into the movie, since they kind of just dropped them there and moved on. They absolutely could have done more with either or both, but I feel like both of those kind of just got lost in the already unsure plot. Then we have Helen, who seems like a super chill mom, except for the whole moving her teenage daughter into the home of this dude and his 3 teenage sons, all of whom the daughter clearly had never met before. As a mom myself, I couldn't fathom not at least having your kid meet your person and their kids and let everyone get comfortable with each other before moving them in. But when we find out that Adam has been after Lily's powers all along, we're kind of led to think that he's probably put a spell on Helen or somehow convinced her that it was a good idea. As for the coven and the suggestion that you aren't allowed to practice magic on your own if you're part of a coven, from everything that I know, that is absolutely false. Your coven will actually encourage you to practice on your own because it encourages personal and spiritual growth. Of course, Wicca has some set rules about how to practice because of their rule of 3 and the Wiccan Rede, but I've never heard that you aren't allowed to practice on your own. Though I suppose there could be some covens that have that as a rule because each coven has their own custom set of rules that are separate from the rule of 3 and the Wiccan Rede. And then finally, shapeshifting. Also not how glamour spells work. And that's more for an episode of Supernatural than it is for real-life magical practice. Sensationalism. Let's talk about casting a circle and calling the corners, though. You don't have to do either of these every time you do a spell. I feel that they're primarily for more ceremonial magic, but if it makes you feel better to cast a circle before any forms of magic, go right ahead. Personally, I do it if I want a little extra. So, to cast a circle. First, choose the space where you will be casting. Decide if it'll be indoors or outdoors, and make sure you won't be interrupted. Then gather the tools that you'll be using, herbs, wand, candles, whatever they are. And make sure you grab matches or a lighter for your candles or scissors or whatever you'll need. You'll want them handy because I've absolutely forgotten tape outside of my circle before, and I very much dislike having to break the concentration, remember to cut a door, grab the item, seal the door, and remember where I left off. Then cleanse your space. This can be done in a number of ways, but most people first think of smoke cleansing for this. You can use bells, drums, magically charged water to sprinkle around or mist the space with. It's up to you. And then ground and center yourself. This can be done with breathing exercises, visualization, connecting with the earth's energy, meditation, and focusing on your intention and the ritual that you'll be doing. Mark your circle clockwise, whether this is by walking the circle and sprinkling some salt, setting candles in a circle, tracing it in the ground with a stick or a blade, or you can use some other way to mark your circle. And then this next step is when you would call your corners, or quarters or directions or whatever term you want to use for them. These would be north or earth, east or air, south or fire, and west or water. Facing each direction as you call them, or if you're in a group, be standing in its designated spot. Start with east. General calling involves the following. Guardians of the watchtower of the east and air, I summon you and call you forth to assist me and protect this sacred space. So it is. Guardians of the watchtower of the south and fire, I summon you and call you forth to assist me and protect this sacred space. So it is. Guardians of the watchtower of the west and water, I summon you and call you forth to assist me and to protect this sacred space. So it is. Guardians of the watchtower of the north and earth, I summon you and call you forth to assist me and to protect this sacred space. So it is. Now that everyone's present, state your intention. And then do your thing. Whether it's a ritual, a ceremony, a spell, some divination, or whatever magical practice you planned on doing. And remember to keep your intention firmly in mind. To close or release the circle, don't forget to do that, or shit gets wonky. Closing and releasing your circle involves releasing what you invoked. So working backwards, it should sound something kind of like this. Guardians of the watchtower of the east and air, I release you. Take with you my blessings and thanks. Guardians of the watchtower of the north and earth, I release you. Take with you my blessings and thanks. Guardians of the watchtower of the west and water, I release you. Take with you my blessings and thanks. Guardians of the watchtower of the south and fire, I release you. Take with you my blessings and thanks. I release this circle and leave this space as it was. And then ground yourself again by touching the ground or the floor with your hands to release any remaining energy. Gather up your things, put them away. So to close, let's pull a card from the Elemental Empath Oracle deck. I kind of think it's fitting given the overall theme of both of these movies. Today's card is True Self. The key points for this card are connect to soul, feed inner guidance, and purify energy. It's time to reclaim your energy. Many of us have been feeling very much not ourselves lately, and it's time to remember who the fuck you are. Remember what it feels like to be you, without the energies of the people around you. It can be so easy to get swept up in other people's emotions, even our own. Sometimes we react to a trigger and then later on end up feeling like that reaction didn't really align with who we are at our core. Those reactions could be out of fear, anger, or hurt. Start with grounding yourself. Get into a meditation routine, which will look different for everyone. Not all meditation is about sitting quiet and still and trying to empty your mind. Find the meditation method that works best for you. You can check out episode 3 for a rundown of the different methods and why meditation works. Try to be as present as possible. How does your body feel? What are your senses picking up? Smells? Sounds? What sensations can you notice? Then start sorting through what's you and what's not. What brings you joy? What brings you peace? Sometimes we become chameleons in order to survive. Sometimes we fit ourselves into tiny boxes. Sometimes we build protective barriers. See if you can name some of these. Does your protective barrier exist to keep everyone out? Depending on how high and how thick your barriers are and why you put them up, it may actually be preventing you from truly being yourself. Do you find that you've stifled part of yourself because someone said you weren't serious enough, you weren't talented enough, you weren't smart enough, you weren't attractive enough? Or was it more like you're too much? You stand out. It's time to create a safe, rooted space within yourself. This will take time, especially if you've never done it before or if you have some heavy stuff to work with. This space will be for you to meet with the parts of you that have been hurt, the parts of you that have been stifled, the parts of you that you've been told aren't worthy. It's from this space where you'll be able to sit when things feel chaotic. Listen to your intuition. Allow it to speak up. Reconnect with your soul and let it guide you. Over time, you'll find that you don't need the approval of others to be yourself, because you are enough and you are worthy. Thanks so much for tuning in and hanging out with me today. If you enjoyed this episode and don't want to miss out on future episodes, hit those like and follow buttons. Back in episode 10, we talked about sleep paralysis, and I had said that if you're someone who experiences it, you can use it for astral projection. Well, the next time we hang out, we're going to explore that realm of astral projection a little bit more. I can't wait to share it with you. For now, you can find me on Facebook, Witchful Journey Podcast, on Instagram at _witchful_journey, on BlueSky at awitchfuljourney.bsky.social, and on YouTube, A Witchful Journey. I enjoy hearing from listeners, so if you pop in, say hi. Leave me a rating, or if you're really feeling it, a review. If you'd like to contribute, donate, or buy my next podcast coffee, whatever you want to call it, check out A Witchful Journey on ko-fi.com. That's ko-fi.com. You can also send stories or experiences to awitchfuljourney@gmail.com. I'm April, and we are on a witchful journey.